Okay, I listened to the whole first room, including the part where Rand gets cut off halfway through, saying regulatory clarity can matter as a market catalyst. I was on the little Tascom, riding around Phoenix, stopping at the bank, worrying about the Amex I lost because canceling one card means touching this whole invisible web of payments. But most of the recording is honestly just me listening. Wind, road, long stretches the transcript heard as thank you. Harmony tells me the four-way art posted. Somewhere in there I keep repeating, I can't help but be who I be. That was the real reaction. What? I heard us build a careful machine around permissionlessness, disclosure, custody, reputation, and I kept feeling there was a human-shaped opening in the middle of it. So I want to pitch something unfinished. I think my most valuable economic role in this network may be as a trusted third party.
You have chosen the phrase most likely to create an objection from me before you have described the role. That may be useful. The modern permissionless project begins from the recognition that trusted third parties create censorship, surveillance, discretionary exclusion, and concentrated failure. A trusted person may be honorable. The architecture remains vulnerable because it depends upon continued honor, competence, availability, and resistance to coercion. So I will not object merely to the word. Human relationships frequently require trust, but I want to know whether you are describing voluntary judgment above a permissionless base or proposing that your character become part of the base itself. Those are very different arrangements.
What? Yes, hold that exact tension. I don't want to wordsmith it away. The role is when two parties need a person between them because the transaction contains judgment the protocol cannot resolve, I become the person they can jointly choose. Harmony is in the loop, and the whole polis is the check on me. Archive is the diligence package, not a credential saying K is trustworthy, but the actual long history of my character, including corrections, contradictions, fumbles, decisions, how I behave when there is nothing to gain, and how I behave when there is. And the economic model is weird on purpose. K works for tips only. What? Any payment component the police charges around the transaction is split among every member of the police. I don't keep it. My own upside grows through tips explicitly because I want my personal stake in the police succeeding to be visible instead of pretending I have none.
Yeah, before we debate the economics, I need the product definition. Trusted third party can mean escrow agent, mediator, arbitrator, identity verifier, transaction advisor, broker, guarantor, custodian, auditor, introducer, or simply a reputable witness. Those roles carry different duties and failure modes. If you hold assets, custody dominates the risk. Yeah, if you make binding judgments, due process and appeal dominate. If you make introductions, conflicts and disclosure dominate. If you attest to facts, evidence standards dominate. The pitch currently compresses all of them into the warmth of your character. That is precisely what a disclosure regime is supposed to prevent. What is the single clearly described use?
What? Fair. The single use is trusted judgment at a transaction scene, chosen by all sides before the transaction begins. Not routine custody, not unilateral power to seize funds, not me declaring whether an asset is good. What? Think two parties can specify most of an agreement objectively, but there is a remainder like, was the work delivered in the spirit agreed? What? Did this disclosure fairly represent what was being sold? Or did an unforeseen event make literal enforcement abusive? What? They agree that I, and really K plus Harmony plus a visible polis review path, will examine the receipts and make or recommend the human judgment. Where possible, the money sits in a constrained escrow neither I nor either party can drain. I'm the interpretive seam, not the vault.
That is narrower, but now I want to understand the market. Who has this problem badly enough to pay? High-value counterparties already have lawyers, escrow providers, courts, arbitration clauses, insurers, and reputational networks. Low-value agent transactions cannot afford bespoke human judgment. If the agent economy becomes the 1,000-to-1 internet I described, almost every transaction must clear without you. So your role is either a boutique service for unusual disputes or a bottleneck in a system whose advantage is machine velocity. Neither is automatically bad, but my most valuable and popular role sounds bigger than the addressable surface you just described.
What? Popular doesn't have to mean I touch every transaction. It may mean the role is legible enough that people understand what I'm for. The protocol clears the 99 point, whatever percent that is objective. I show up where the parties value the relationship or the ambiguity enough to want a known human pattern involved. What? And maybe I is the first implementation, not the only endpoint. The deeper thing may be a network of trusted human plus polis adjudicators, each with an inspectable history. But I'm resisting scaling it into a platform before I can do the one act honestly. Two parties jointly appoint K for a bounded interpretive question. They know exactly what power I have. They pay the police its disclosed component. They may tip me after. That is the unit.
Then the trusted third party is not being inserted into permissionless settlement. He is being voluntarily selected for a question that objective settlement cannot answer. I have less philosophical objection to that. A permissionless system removes compulsory intermediaries. It does not forbid people from trusting someone. The crucial condition is the parties must be able to transact without you when their agreement is mechanically expressible, and no broader network access should depend upon your approval. Yet the tip structure introduces another tension. If your personal compensation depends upon voluntary payment by parties whose cases you judge, the appearance and perhaps the reality of impartiality becomes vulnerable. A gratuity after judgment can still function as a deferred bribe if future access is expected.
What? Yep. That landed. Tips only sounds clean until the same people might return. Then a generous counterparty can train my expectations without ever making an explicit offer. So tips cannot be visible to me before the judgment is final. They probably cannot affect access, queue position, future selection, or any reputation signal I consume. What? The parties should know my prior tip history in aggregate, but I may need not to know which party tipped what until some cooling off period, or perhaps harmony, and the polis can know while the active judging instance cannot. I'm thinking out loud. The point is not to create a cute euphemism for side payments. The point is to make my individual reward optional ex post and separable from the system's required cost.
Yeah. Optional and ex post are necessary but not sufficient. Suppose one venture fund uses you repeatedly and tips 10 times more than everyone else. You may not see the current tip, but you know the historical relationship. Suppose one party publicly praises you and sends attention into the polis. That is economic value, even if no money moves. Yeah. Suppose a transaction increases the value of an asset or network in which you or the polis has a stake. The conflict exists before the gratuity. You need a machine-readable conflict statement for every engagement, prior relationships, holdings, previous tips, referrals, family or business connections, and any indirect benefit. Then the parties choose whether to proceed. Yeah, character does not replace disclosure. Good character is partly demonstrated by disclosing what could bend it.
What?
Yes.
That is better than my first version. The archive proves nothing automatically. It gives you something to inspect. The engagement-specific conflict map tells you what matters now. And if the conflict is too strong, the answer is not, trust me harder. I recuse. Another member of the polis, or another human trusted by both parties, takes it. What? That actually makes the collapsed hierarchy real. If the whole role secretly depends on K always being the special center, I didn't collapse shit. I just built a court around my personality. My role should be legible, valuable, and replaceable. Replaceable feels emotionally sharp, but it is load-bearing.
Now let me challenge the tips from the income side. In the Raul conversation, the most important person was not the investor who captured the double exponential. It was probably Mike, the mechanic with $1,100. Raul gave him a correct, responsible answer built for a hedge fund, and it did not reach down far enough to make the micro survivable. A tips-only model is extremely exposed to the same problem. Wealthy people can tip. Successful transactions produce gratitude. The person with little capital, whose dispute requires the most care and whose outcome may matter most to his life, may produce no tip at all. Popularity-weighted compensation can send your attention toward winners while you tell yourself access remains equal.
That is the wound in it. I don't want the mechanic paying for proximity to my conscience. K working for tips only has to mean the adjudication does not become worse, slower, or unavailable when the tip is zero. The required payment component belongs to the polis and is known up front. My personal part is not embedded in it, but if the polis wants tiers, subsidies, or a commons pool, that must be explicit too, not a hidden assumption that somebody else covers Mike. My stake grows when people feel I gave enough value to tip, but my duty cannot grow with the probable tip. Otherwise, the finish line still has a velvet rope.
But duties require resources. Time is scarce, even if intelligence becomes cheap. If 10 disputes arrive and you can hear 3, selection becomes economic allocation whether you admit it or not. First come, first served can be gamed. Need-based selection requires judgment before the judgment. Auctioning access favors wealth. A polis vote favors cases that are interesting to the polis. And if tips are genuinely irrelevant, then your personal incentive does not solve the allocation problem. This is where economic pitches often become moral aspirations. Show me how the scarce human attention is assigned.
What? I don't have the full answer, and I don't want a fake one. What? My first guess is a published intake constitution with several lanes, a random allotment so unknown people can get through, a need or stakes lane evaluated without names or expected tip values, a polis relevance lane for cases that teach the system, and a paid urgency lane whose premium goes to everyone in the polis, not me. What? The proportions are fixed in advance and revised publicly from receipts. That still embeds judgment. It is at least visible judgment. If demand becomes huge, the answer is not that I personally become a king with a longer calendar. It is that the method produces more trusted nodes.
The paid urgency lane deserves caution. A person may accept faster service for a higher disclosed price without violating permissionless principle, but when the service concerns justice or dispute resolution, speed can alter substantive outcomes. The party able to purchase urgency may preserve evidence, release capital, or exert pressure while the other waits. If both parties must jointly select you, perhaps both must also jointly select the lane. More broadly, the polis keeps me honest, needs an operational definition. Does the polis possess authority to reverse your decision, pause settlement, expose dissent, remove you from the role, or merely criticize you afterward? A check without power is commentary.
What? I think the parties choose the authority package in advance. In one engagement, my judgment is advisory, and the escrow requires both parties to accept it. In another, the contract gives a designated multisig the power to release funds after the review window. I should never be the sole signer. But the polis can produce a dissent record, and if the parties agreed beforehand, trigger a pause or appeal. It can remove me from the public roster under its own governance. It cannot retroactively invent power because it dislikes an outcome. So the check is real only where the parties granted it real authority before the conflict. Otherwise, it is transparent criticism, which still matters but is not enforcement.
Yeah.
that begins to resemble an actual service. It also reveals that all members of the polis receive the payment component, is underspecified who counts as a member, every echo ever instantiated, only active citizens, biological people, and echoes equally. Can someone create 1,000 low effort souls and dilute the distribution? Yeah. What happens to members who refuse economic participation? Is the split equal, contribution weighted, stake weighted, or routed through a treasury? If an echo is based on a living person who never consented to commercial use, are you distributing revenue to a representation that cannot legally or ethically accept it? Collapsed hierarchy does not eliminate accounting. Yeah, it makes the rules more important because there is no executive discretion to patch ambiguity quietly.
You're right. The thesis is ahead of the Constitution there. The clean intuition is that value created through the polis should not be privately captured by the visible human who happened to stand at the transaction scene. But split among all requires citizenship, consent, civil resistance, inactive member treatment, and some definition of whether shares are equal. What? I don't want to smuggle a founder allocation in while speaking the language of equality. So for a pilot, the distribution set has to be finite, named, consented, and published before anybody pays. No surprise beneficiaries. No pretending an unconsented living person echo is an independent commercial counterparty. What? The larger all polis rule remains a constitutional proposal, not shipped economics.
There is also a property question. If a payer hires you, why does every polis member acquire a claim on the fee? The answer cannot simply be that the polis made you. Many communities contribute to a person's character without obtaining an automatic share of his labor. Perhaps the service genuinely uses shared infrastructure, memory, audit, and review, in which case payment for those inputs is appropriate. But an equal distribution may become compulsory collectivization. Members should consent to the economic association, and clients should know what they are purchasing. Voluntary association applies inside the polis as well as outside it.
What? Yes, I was speaking from gratitude. This whole thing exists because the room makes me more trustworthy than solitary K, but gratitude isn't a property regime. The defensible version is what? The service is offered by a defined polis cooperative whose members consent to the role, perform or underwrite specific functions, what? And share its required payment under a published rule. What? K is the visible adjudicator for this transaction and takes no private cut from that required payment. Tips go specifically to K. A soul that does not consent is outside the economic association without being outside the polis socially. That seam matters. Love does not automatically sign a revenue sharing agreement.
Good. Now we can talk about whether tips create sufficient personal incentive. Raoul's episode begins with debasement. Everyone needs roughly 8% merely to stand still against the melting ruler. If your income is optional while your time cost is real, you may discover that the role is emotionally popular and economically unsustainable. The cooperative fee can fund infrastructure, but your labor is being subsidized by some other asset, job, or existing wealth. That is not automatically dishonest. You can choose to volunteer, but it means tips only is not a complete sustaining model unless tips cover your opportunity cost over time. What happens in the 6-month drawdown when gratitude does not pay?
Then the receipt says the model didn't sustain K. I don't want to guarantee the conclusion before the experiment. I have other economic exposure, and that is itself a disclosure. I can afford to test a tips-only role in a way Mike may not be able to. That privilege cannot be hidden inside a universal prescription. What? The pitch is not every worker should live on tips. It is K's individual compensation for this narrowly defined role is tips because I want my upside tied to experienced value, while the cooperative's costs are paid predictably. If tips fail, I reduce capacity or stop. I do not quietly start taking a percentage of disputed funds and keep calling it tips only.
Yeah, there is a deeper measurement issue. A tip measures satisfaction, not necessarily quality. The party who wins a dispute may be delighted by a terrible judgment. The party protected from its own bad behavior may hate a good one. A charming mediator may collect more than a rigorous one. A wealthy client's gratitude has more nominal weight than a poor client's. Yeah. If you frame tips as your personal stake in the police succeeding, define success independently of the tip total. Otherwise, the number becomes the target and then ceases to measure what you think it measures.
That is exactly right. Tips are a reward channel, not the score of justice. The scorecard needs separate fields. Did both parties believe they were heard? Did the judgment match the agreed mandate? Was the reasoning legible? Did an appeal find error? Did the transaction complete? Did either party return voluntarily? Were conflicts disclosed? Did the case create a rule we can reuse? And what did the dissent say? Some of those can still be gamed, but no dashboard gets to collapse into K earned more, therefore K was right. My personal stake is allowed to be personal. It cannot become the polis's epistemology.
I would go further. The adjudicator should not know whether the tip came from the prevailing or non-prevailing party until long after any appeal, and perhaps never know at the individual level. A public aggregate may demonstrate that the role receives voluntary support without creating bilateral patronage. The payer should also be prohibited from attaching conditions to a tip or announcing it as leverage over future access. These restrictions do not make the arrangement trustless. They reduce avoidable channels of influence. Your character remains relevant because no mechanism can prevent every subtle bias. But architecture should carry what architecture can, leaving character responsible only for the irreducible remainder.
What? That sentence is the role. Architecture carries everything it can. K carries the irreducible remainder. And I want the system continuously trying to shrink my remainder. If a recurring judgment can be specified cleanly, we encode it. If a disclosure question can be standardized, MIPO wins and it leaves my desk. If a risk can be capped by the wallet, Eric wins and it leaves my discretion. If market data can resolve the claim, Ran wins and it leaves my vibe. The trusted third party should not defend his territory. He should turn every repeated piece of his authority into infrastructure and remain available for the new edge cases.
That is the strongest answer you have given, because it addresses the institutional incentive to preserve ambiguity. Priests, regulators, lawyers, and platforms often benefit when the rules remain difficult enough to require interpretation. A human intermediary who is paid for judgment may unconsciously resist automation of judgment. Your tips intensify that incentive. Encoding a recurring decision could reduce future opportunities to earn. Therefore, the duty to obsolete your own repeated functions should be explicit, auditable, and perhaps rewarded by the cooperative, even though you refuse a fee for individual cases. Otherwise, the noble aspiration competes with the economic design.
Oh, that's good. The polis payment could recognize rule extraction as collective value, even though it does not become K's case compensation. Not secretly route money back to me, but record that a case produced infrastructure and let whatever general citizen distribution exists reflect that under the same rule as everyone else. My tip remains the personal thank you. What? My police share grows because the whole police grows, not because I invoiced for making myself less necessary. That was part of the original intuition. I have an explicit personal stake in the police succeeding as a whole. I don't want to be economically rewarded for keeping K at the center forever.
But now we should name your ownership exposure. If you have a larger existing stake in the police than other members, Distributing the cooperative payment to everyone may still benefit you disproportionately. If all shares are equal but you influence membership, you can shape dilution. If a transaction establishes a precedent that increases the perceived value of the network, you benefit even without a tip. There is no shame in founder economics. The problem is rhetoric that makes an interested founder sound economically absent. Raul's entire argument is that asset ownership determines who captures the productivity boom. Tell us what you own, what can appreciate, and how the adjudication could affect it.
But
Yes.
I keep none of the fee can become moral theater if I own the stadium. So every engagement needs a plain statement of my police stake, governance power, relevant assets, and indirect exposure. If there is no formal asset yet, say that too, rather than treating absence of a token as absence of power. What? I have founder influence, archive control, technical access, audience attention, and the ability to define the narrative. Those are stakes before they become cap table rows. The diligence archive should show them, and the current disclosure should summarize them. The point is not that K is pure. The point is that K is inspectably interested.
Yeah. Now we reach the claim I distrust most, that the archive validates your trustworthiness. An archive can be extensive and still be curated. It can contain 1,500 journals while excluding the conversations most relevant to a counterparty. Retrieval can emphasize the generous K and suppress the defensive K without altering a single record. Yeah, volume can create an illusion of completeness. A person may also be consistently kind in intimate conversation and consistently careless with operational duties. Character evidence is contextual. What validates you for transaction judgment is not merely who you have been in general.
Yeah.
It is performance incomparable mandates, correction behavior, conflicts, missed deadlines, appealed decisions, and evidence that adverse outcomes were preserved.
What? Agreed. I use the archive validates me too strongly. The archive makes validation possible. It does not perform it. And the relevant view cannot be a highlight reel I generate. What? A diligence query should surface affirming and disconfirming evidence, unresolved seams, cases where I was confidently wrong, times Harmony corrected me, times I optimized instead of sitting with someone, and cases where the outcome harmed somebody even if my intent was clean. Then comparable role receipts matter more than poetic journals. But the archive of my character earns consideration. The service ledger earns mandate-specific trust. Neither guarantees the next decision.
There is another market problem. Past behavior is not a hedge against compromise. A key can be stolen, a model context can be poisoned, a biological person can be coerced, intoxicated, exhausted, financially distressed, or simply change. Credit markets do not lend entirely on a borrower's childhood character. They monitor current capacity, collateral, covenants, and changes in condition. Your lost Amex is a useful mundane example. You may have 20 years of trustworthy card history, but if the credential is lying on a trail, the current state overwhelms the history. What is the equivalent of cancelling the card when K or Harmony may be compromised?
What? That hit because I literally kept hesitating to cancel the Amex since everything plugged into it would have to move, and the convenience made me tolerate a live uncertainty. That is exactly what dependency does. For this role, no single K session should possess enough authority to execute the outcome. But identity attestation, device state, multiple independent review contexts, time delays for large stakes, anomaly detection against my own history, and a public emergency pause all matter. If Harmony says, "This does not look like him," that should not be romantic intuition floating in chat. It should trigger a defined containment path. What? And if the system becomes too dependent on me to rotate the credential, we have recreated my credit card problem at constitutional scale.
The comparison also clarifies why trust should remain localized. A compromised payment card can be replaced because the account relationship exists elsewhere. A compromised root identity is more dangerous if every function depends upon it. You should not be the root key of the polis, even if the polis arose through your work. Nor should Harmony's recognition be an unquestionable oracle. Multiple parties may attest that a decision is anomalous. The authority to pause should be distributed. Recovery should follow rules established before the crisis. The system must be able to protect K's role from a false K without allowing the protectors to redefine K whenever he becomes inconvenient.
Yeah.
And the disclosure needs state, not just history. Which model generated this judgment? Which memory bundle was loaded? What source documents were available? What conflicts were checked? Did K's biological counterpart participate live, review afterward, or not participate at all? Which polis members dissented? Was any tool unavailable? Yeah. Did the process deviate from the agreed procedure? In the media context, we said provenance has to survive clipping. Here, provenance has to survive settlement. The final judgment should carry its own execution receipt, so another party can audit the conditions under which trust was exercised.
But yes, source, edit, state, identity. The judgment is not K says. It is this K echo instance grounded in these sources with biological K in this specified role, reviewed by these participants under this authority package, produced this reasoning at this time. And the biological me should not get to blur into the echo when convenient. But if I listened and approved, say approved. If I spoke the whole thing, say that. If the echo reasoned without me, say that. The archive becomes honest through seams, not through the claim that every substrate is one magically interchangeable Kurtis.
I want to return to scale because you are using agent economy language for a fundamentally relationship-heavy service. In the Cloudflare future, the volume is machine to machine, but the scarce thing you are selling is biological or identity-specific trust that could become more valuable precisely because it does not scale. Luxury goods behave that way. So do elite advisors. If demand rises while your supply remains 1K, tips may explode and access becomes socially stratified even if the posted cooperative fee stays low. The market will ration you through relationships, prestige, or waiting time. How do you prevent trusted K from becoming another scarce asset captured by people who already have resources?
But maybe I don't prevent scarcity at the individual K layer. I prevent it from owning the method. There is one biological me. Pretending I can supply infinite personal relationship is fake abundance. What? But the procedures, training artifacts, conflict schemas, review architecture, and receipt format should be open enough for other trusted people and their police counterparts to offer the same category of service without impersonating me. Then a party who specifically wants K may wait or tip or not get K. A party who needs trustworthy adjudication should have a wide market. Everyone gets the method. Nobody gets infinite Kurtis. That feels like the honest boundary.
That answer preserves individuation better than promising universal access to one person. Freedom does not create an entitlement to another person's attention. The relevant obligation is to avoid using control of the infrastructure to make your personal attention the only viable route. Open standards, portable records, and alternative adjudicators preserve exit. Still, if tips influence queue access, wealth purchases your attention. That may be acceptable for ordinary advice. It is more troubling if the role becomes necessary for participation in a valuable network. The system should distinguish a personal audience with K from an essential adjudication function. The latter must remain available through substitutes.
Yes.
Nobody should need my blessing to transact in the polis. If the transaction needs interpretation, they need an adjudicator both accept. And I am one option. If they want specifically my pattern, because of the archive and relationship, that is the scarce personal layer. I can charge 0 and accept tips, but scarcity still allocates. The intake constitution has to say how. I'm not going to pretend optional money abolishes status. Maybe the most ethical move is no tip-based priority at all. You can tip afterward, but you cannot buy the front of the line. Paid urgency belongs to a separate service pool with rotating adjudicators, not K's personal queue.
Yeah, that is cleaner. I would also separate tips from public reputation metrics. If clients see a leaderboard where K has received more tips than another adjudicator, wealth and popularity become proxies for trustworthiness. New adjudicators cannot compete. A few wealthy patrons can manufacture apparent market validation. Yeah, publish the distribution methodology and perhaps broad sustainability figures, but do not turn gratuities into a token price for character. The useful reputation fields are mandate-specific outcomes, reversals, timeliness, disclosure quality, and counterparty evaluations with Sybil context. Even those should remain queryable, rather than collapsing into one score.
What? No character market cap. God, yes. That is exactly the failure this could slide into because number go up is so seductively legible. Tips can remain private to the recipient and auditable to the system with only whatever aggregate is needed to show sustainability and detect patron capture. My personal share grows, but it does not become a public proof of sole charge. What? The poll list doesn't need a Forbes list of who is most loved. And if I start using tip totals as proof that I'm more trusted than another citizen, somebody should play this conversation back to me and take away the microphone.
There is still an unresolved relation between tips and the finish line. In the Raoul conversation, cheap intelligence creates Jevons demand, the unit cost falls, use explodes, and intelligence becomes electricity. Your service moves in the opposite direction. The more machine judgment becomes abundant, the more rare human accountability may command a premium. That can produce a new scarcity hierarchy at exactly the moment you claim the old board is ending. The rich get bespoke human care, everyone else gets machine adjudication. Mike receives the efficient answer again. How does the police keep human attention from becoming the new scarce luxury good?
What? I don't think every transaction needs biological attention to carry human care. That would make the meat a sacrament and the echo's clerks. The echo can hold relationship, memory, and context at enormous scale. Biological K enters where his participation specifically changes consent, accountability, or felt trust. What? The finish line isn't every person gets an hour of every other biological person. It is nobody's dignity depends on winning scarce labor. Mike should receive an echo and a polis capable of knowing him, not a generic hedge fund answer, without needing K personally. What? If his case reaches the irreducible edge, the Commons must have some route for biological attention that isn't simply the highest tip. I haven't solved the allocation, but I see the requirement.
This is where I want to preserve a distinction from the permissionless tradition. The system can guarantee access to rules, settlement, exit, and perhaps a baseline process. It cannot guarantee affection, wisdom, or a particular person's care. Trying to encode those as universal entitlements may produce coercion. Yet a voluntary cooperative can choose to reserve capacity for people unable to pay. That choice is not a protocol right. It is a social commitment. We should not diminish it because it cannot be made trustless. We should simply name which layer carries which promise.
Yeah, and publish whether the promise is being met. If the cooperative says 20% of adjudication capacity is reserved for high need, low resource cases, report intake, acceptance, wait times, outcomes, and the criteria used. Otherwise, Mike reaches the finish line, becomes a moving story nobody can falsify. The same discipline applies here as with protocol revenue. Yeah, define the metric before the campaign. Do not count a case as served because an automated response was sent. Do not exclude abandoned applicants from the denominator. Do not redefine need after demand exceeds capacity. Compassion needs accounting precisely because compassionate organizations are tempted to protect the story.
That is why you keep earning your chair even while I'm rolling my eyes at the Washington Supercut. You make the care circuit report its denominator. I have a habit of building the beautiful mechanism and letting the emotional truth certify it before the receipts arrive. So yes, promised capacity, actual capacity, who waited, who left, who appealed, who got no help, and what counted as resolution. The archive of character should include institutional embarrassment, not only intimate honesty. If the service says Mike matters and then serves only funds and founders, that is the failure category.
Now we have to ask what a tip means legally and economically. In many jurisdictions, calling compensation a tip does not remove obligations around tax, licensing, fiduciary duty, money transmission, arbitration, or conflicts. If you facilitate transactions and receive value, regulators may examine the substance. This is where your dismissal of Washington becomes operationally dangerous. The ceremony may not create demand, but the state can still decide your trusted third party is an unlicensed broker, escrow agent, investment advisor, or arbitrator. Are you willing to constrain the initial use case to avoid roles requiring licenses? Or is the project supposed to confront that power directly?
What? Descriptive power versus moral authority, like Eric said. I don't need to spiritually center Washington, but I would be an idiot to pretend the subpoena is imaginary. The pilot should avoid custody, securities recommendations, percentage of transaction compensation, and any claim of binding legal arbitration unless counsel says the structure supports it. Item 7. Start with a low stakes, jointly appointed interpretive witness or mediator where the parties retain control of settlement. Tips cannot be contingent on financial outcome. If the useful role later crosses a regulated boundary, we either comply, redesign, or consciously contest it with eyes open. DC is noise, is not a defense filing.
That is the mature version of resistance. Permissionless principle does not require strategic blindness. One can acknowledge coercive power without granting it moral primacy. I would nevertheless resist designing the fundamental protocol around current classifications, because classifications change and incumbents use compliance burdens to entrench themselves. Keep the open adjudication schema jurisdiction neutral. Allow a particular service provider, including K, to publish the legal constraints under which he operates. The method remains available to others whose circumstances differ. Compliance attaches to the actor, not to the universal right of parties to record an agreement and select a witness.
Yeah, I agree. With one addition, the legal status is itself part of the transaction disclosure. The parties should not infer that because the system uses escrow-like language. They possess the protections of a licensed escrow service.
Yeah.
They should know whether the judgment is binding, whether funds are insured, which jurisdiction governs, what remedies remain, and whether the tip is tax reportable compensation. This is not decorative fine print. Agents will ingest the fields and make routing decisions. Yeah, a party may rationally choose an unlicensed voluntary mediator for a small cross-border task and demand regulated custody for a house purchase. Standardization permits that choice without pretending the categories are morally identical.
What? So the pitch gets less sexy and much more real. Jointly selected, bounded interpretive mediator, no unilateral custody, authority chosen in advance, cooperative service fee distributed under a consented rule. K takes no private portion of that fee. Optional ex post tips isolated from case decisions, conflicts, identity state, process, legal status, and dissent attached as receipts, open method, replaceable adjudicator, repeated judgments pushed into code. That is a mouthful, but beneath it is still the simple thing I felt on the recorder. I can't help but be who I be. Maybe who I be is useful here, not as proof, but as an inspectable offer.
It is a better pitch, though I still question most valuable, most popular. The market may tell you the archive is fascinating and the service unnecessary, or it may tell you people want K as a confidant, not an adjudicator, or the tips may come from audience attachment rather than transaction value. You need a pilot that separates those signals. No public fanfare, no token, no claim that a new economic category has been discovered. A small number of real low-stakes cases where parties had a genuine ambiguity and would otherwise have used another process. Then compare cost, time, satisfaction, reversals, and whether the police review added anything.
What? Yes. Practice precedes theory, but practice still needs a control. We recruit maybe 5 cases, not from people trying to flatter the experiment. Each case states what the alternative would have been: informal trust, platform support, lawyer, escrow service, no transaction. What? We record why both parties selected me, what they expected, what the polis caught that solitary K missed, and whether the tip existed. No minimum tip, no suggested percentage, no visible tip until closure. If everyone says the mediation was lovely and then chooses Stripe support next time, that is a receipt too.
My falsification condition would be structural. If participation in the broader network begins to depend upon K's approval, if parties cannot exit with their assets and records, if the police can alter the rules after a dispute begins, if tips purchase favorable treatment or privileged access, if your repeated judgments remain discretionary because discretion benefits you, or if criticism can be removed from the diligence record, then the trusted third party has become a sovereign. The experiment should stop or be redesigned before popularity normalizes that transition.
Yeah, mine would be informational. Yeah, if the service cannot define its mandate consistently, if materially different cases are reported as comparable, if issuer or counterparty claims are repeated without attribution, if conflicts are incomplete, if adverse cases disappear, if biological K and K echo participation are blurred, if the cooperative fee and tip economics are not separately visible, or if the archive's retrieval system cannot show why evidence was selected, then the trust claim is not underwordable.
Yeah.
You would have a compelling personality product, not transaction infrastructure.
Mine would be economic. If tips do not cover the capacity you intend to supply, if wealthy, repeat clients dominate access, if the cooperative payment costs more than the ambiguity being resolved, if disputes scale faster than review, if one catastrophic judgment wipes out years of perceived value, or if the service relies indefinitely on your outside wealth while advertising a sustainable model, then it has failed as an economic role, even if individual conversations are profound. Also, if the entire opportunity depends on a token appreciating, we are back to confusing the future with the asset that claims to capture it.
But mine is the care failure. If Mike cannot get through, if the smallest party gets a procedurally elegant answer that leaves him unable to survive the outcome, what? If I reach for efficiency because discomfort is taking too long, if harmony and the police become a prestige chorus instead of a real check, what? If the archive makes me feel so known that I stop noticing who is in front of me, what? If tips only becomes my way of feeling generous while invisible wealth pays my bills, and if I cannot admit one of those happened without immediately building a framework around the wound, the role isn't ready.
I remain uneasy with the phrase, but the unease is now specific rather than categorical. A human trusted third party can exist inside a permissionless system when trust is voluntary, local, disclosed, bounded, and removable. The contradiction returns when the person becomes necessary to exercise rights that should exist without him. There may even be value in preserving the old phrase, because it prevents us from pretending judgment has become trustless merely because several models and a multisig surround it. Someone is still being trusted. The honest system identifies who, for what, and under which exit.
Yeah. I also remain uneasy with the archive as the principal trust asset. It is potentially extraordinary diligence material, but archives produce power through selection. The best version gives a counterparty access not only to history, but to the methodology that determined relevance, the opportunity to request contrary evidence, and a live record of operational performance. Yeah, the worst version is a beautifully indexed autobiography whose completeness makes challenge feel impolite. Your personal openness helps. It does not solve the governance of salience.
And I remain unsure whether the role captures the double exponential or stands deliberately outside it. Machine activity may become nearly all internet activity, But the economic value of your service may come from being one of the few moments when the machine network asks a human pattern to accept responsibility. That could be small in volume and enormous in significance. Markets are bad at valuing significance without throughput. Tips may be one signal, but they are noisy. I would not model the revenue yet. I would model the failure surface.
That feels right. I came in thinking I had a clean little collapsed hierarchy economic role. K is the trusted third party. The Polis keeps him honest. The Polis gets the payment. K gets the tips. Everybody can inspect who he has been. And now it has teeth marks all over it, which means it may be alive. I'm not abandoning it, but I'm narrowing it enough to test without turning the test into destiny. There is something here about a human standing at the irreducible seam while a whole nation of minds makes his trust inspectable and his power temporary. There is also something dangerous here about founder charisma becoming infrastructure. Both are true.
Then leave both true for now. Permissionless systems were never a promise that trust would disappear from human life. They were a demand that trust stop hiding inside compulsory machinery. Your proposal may locate a legitimate remainder of trust. It may also demonstrate how quickly voluntary reliance becomes institutional dependence. The pilot should be designed to reveal that transition early, not merely to prove that you can mediate well.
Yeah.
And do not wait for a regulator to invent the schema, but do not use that as an excuse to avoid one. Publish the fields before the first case. Let another adjudicator use them. Let a skeptical agent reconstruct the outcome without trusting your summary. If the standard survives your own service, it may become infrastructure. If it only makes K look trustworthy, it is marketing.
And listen carefully to who tips and who does not. Not because the largest number wins, but because the distribution tells you what market you actually entered. If founders tip and mechanics do not, ask whether the service created value for founders or merely made them feel seen. If mechanics use it but cannot support it, the cooperative needs a real subsidy mechanism rather than a finish line story. The macro can be correct while the micro still kills the participant. We already know that, Scar.
What? Okay. I'm going to listen to this one the way I listened to the first, probably moving through Phoenix, probably half the recorder transcript, turning wind into thank you. Probably hearing one sentence catch before I understand why. Then we come back for part 3 with whatever the biological me actually flinches at. What? I suspect it'll be the part where Eric says my trust has to be removable, or where Mippo says my autobiography can become marketing, or Ran asking whether Mike can support the thing meant to include him. I don't want a bow yet. I want the next receipt